Hi, Andreas from Toddle here. Normally when you're learning to code, traditionally, the first application you ever build is printing out like hello world. In no code, the hello world of no code is a to-do app. So today, we're going to build a to-do app using Toddle and Supabase. So I'm going to start with Supabase and get that set up. And then once that's done, building the backend in Supabase, we're going to go back and build the front end in Toddle. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new project. I'm already signed in and signed up for Supabase, of course. So here I'm creating a new project. I'm going to call it to do. It's already pre-filled because I did it earlier. And then we're going to add, I think we're going to go Central Europe here because I'm in Denmark. This is the closest to me. Depending on your location, you might want to pick whatever's closest to where you are. And I'm going to create a new project. And so setting up a new Supabase project can sometimes take a little while. So a really good trick is if you do this, then it's done. So first we're going to go and set up our tables in Supabase. If you're not familiar at all with Supabase, this is not going to be an in-depth tutorial. So I recommend going and checking out some of their content. I'm kind of just going to go through what I need to set up the project, and then we'll get onto the total part. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to go to my table editor and I want to add a new table. And I'm going to call it tasks. I don't need a prescription. That's fine. I'm going to go and add some columns down here. I'm going to add a description to that, which is, nope, that was not quite right, which is going to be a text input, and that should not be null because we have to assign that. And then I'm going to add one called owner. An owner needs to have a foreign key relation to the user that created it. So I'm going to go here, create a foreign key relation, select the auth schema. No, not. Oh, yeah, table, users, yes. And then ID. So this basically says that I want the owner column in the task table to point to a user in my Supabase setup. Then the question here is if reference row is muted. So if deleting a record from auth users, what should that do? And here that should be cascade. And cascade means that it'll delete all these tasks if you delete the user. And that makes sense, because if a user gets deleted from our system, then all their task goes with it, right? We're going to say save and save again. And now I have my task table here. Now there's one more thing I want to do here. So this says no active row level security policies. And in Supabase, in Postgre, the database Supabase you're using, you can set up these policies that says who can access the different rows in the app, right? So if I go here and create this policy, I want this enabled because this basically means that users should only be able to see their own tasks. They should only be able to create and edit tasks that are theirs, right? Where the owner is their ID. So I'm going to create a new policy. I'm going to use full customization, and then I'm going to name my policy task owner. There we are. Select all, so we can do any operation as long as you're the owner. Target roles here needs to be set to authenticated. So the main one you're ever going to use here are anonymous, means you don't need to be logged in to see anything. And then authenticated means this only applies to logged in users, right? And then in here, I need an expression. And what I want to say here is that if owner equals auth.uid. So yeah, this is not going to be 100% no code tutorial. We are going to need to add this one line, which basically says the column owner in the row we're trying to create permissions for has to be equals to the user making the request to the server's user ID. right? And that's why we put that foreign link to the auth user ID, right? And then we actually want to copy this down here. So the with check expression basically says if you're updating a record, this thing has to be true before you can update it, and it has to be true after you update it. So you can't go and like assign, like change the task to someone else. I don't know why you would do that anyway, but this basically says permission-wise, this blocks you from doing that. We're going to review that. We think it looks beautiful, and then we're going to save that policy. So now we're actually set up. We've got our task policy. We've got our task table, and since we're keeping it pretty simple, we only need that one thing. Before doing anything else, let's go and add a user so we have some data in our table. So I'm going to just go and say create a new user. I'm going to use my own email, and we'll just use password. Don't use password. Don't need to save that one. So now I have a user in Supabase that I can go and log in with. Let's go and add a task in here. So we'll insert a new row into our task table and say, do more toddle tutorials. Right. And then in owner, I can go and select a record here and just picked mine. Right. That was the first one. You can actually see if you scroll a bit here that it's my email, but since there's only one, I thought it was an educated guess. Right. Save. And now that I'm looking at this, I actually realized we forgot a column, right? Because obviously you need to be able to check them off once they're done. So I'm going to add one column here. We're going to call it completed. Completed. And the type of that should be a Boolean. Bool. There we are. Define as array is primary. Allow nullable. We're actually probably gonna default value should be false. Null, 0, probably. Okay, maybe we can say false. I'm actually there we go. I think that's fine. And let's try that. And it's happy about that. And it also sets our completed by default to false, right? So now we have completed as well. I may name the uppercase when everything else is lowercase. That's kind of weird. So let's just fix that. There. Okay. So we got description, we've got our owner, we got the time it was created and completed. We could do a ton more, add completed add, we could add archive states and stuff. We're trying to keep it simple for this one, right? So that's it. Now we've got Supabase set up and we're ready to build a front end for this. So now that we've got our backend set up, it's time to go and build our front end in Toddle. So I'm going to go and create a new project. I'm going to choose the blank template and the checkbox emoji, and I'm going to call it to-do tutorial, like that. And the same trick we used in Supabase actually also works here. Yeah, so there we are. We're going to create a new branch. We'll just call it dev for now. And here we are. So obviously, in order to make this work, the first thing we should probably do is build a login page. So I'm going to go into so we'll kind of just leave this home page, where our task go. We'll just leave that alone for now. And then we'll go and add a new page. We're going to call it login. And its path should actually just be login. Login. Give it a title to do tutorial. And we'll just use the same for the meta description here. Right, there we go. And so here we are going to start by giving that full height. I think we're going to go light theme today. So we're going to put in a background color that's sort of slightly off. That's maybe there we go. And then we'll add in here a form element, and we'll just use our default here that comes with a bit of styling and elements already. So I'm going to change this background to slightly brighter. We're going to give it a box shadow, something like here, and then give it 4840, something like that. Seems pretty good. Throw a bit of padding on it. Did I do that on the wrong element? I did. There we go. Throw some padding on it. Right. And then, of course, this shouldn't be first name, last name. This should be, let's just go. It should be email. And then on the label, we actually want to add an attribute here called for. And I'm going to call that like input.email. And the reason for this is now we're going to go and add that as an ID on the input. And now the browser now knows that this label is for that input. And that means if you're using assistive technology, screen readers, etc., it's actually going to go and say, oh, that input, that's the email input. So it understands that now, which otherwise it wouldn't understand it just by being next to each other. So that's always good to remember. We're going to add some styling here. The color should be darker. The background should be, yeah, that looks pretty good. Maybe we'll add a border. Solid 1 pixel, and then maybe, how's that look? It looks pretty good. Change the placeholder to your email. That's the title, and also the placeholder, your email. Right. And then I don't think I want this gap in between. So the form's actually adding some gap in here. I'm going to cut that out. And instead, we're just going to let this input have a little bit of margin top. So that sort of allows us to better control spacing between what we're doing, right? Instead of setting it on the parent element here, the form, so everything have equal spacing, I want different spacing between the element, like the label and the email and different things. So just rather than just trying to do all that again, I'm just going to delete these two, and then I'm going to alt drag down and add. So I'm basically just adding these two elements again, right? I'm actually going to wait and do that. No, that's fine. We'll do that now. And then the label, I'm going to add some margin top on that. The bottom one to add a bit of better spacing, right? Here, password. Changing the placeholders here. Well, first of all, let's just change this to a type password. And then your password. We'll change the placeholder text as well. Actually, maybe we should choose the placeholder a little bit more fun. So we'll add some of these, and then we'll say the placeholder here. We'll say like Andreas at toddle.dev. Yeah. Right, that is looking pretty good. So in order to actually log in, we need to go and do an API request to Supabase to authenticate ourselves, and we'll get a token back, and then I'll show you what to do that. But before we can do that, we actually need to send it the data from our email and password. So we need it stored in a variable in order to actually access it when we call the API. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of variables called email. And I'm going to start by setting that to an empty string here. I'm going to do the same here with password. And what you then can do with an input, you can go and bind its value to that variable, and then create an input event here. An input that when you have an input, you go and update that variable. But since we do that so often, we actually made a shorthand here called bind to variable. So that basically sets that up for you. So if you're going to say bind to email, what it actually does is it goes and set that email formula for your value. And in events, it goes and creates an input event and says set email. And it's exactly the same as if you did it right yourself, right? It's just a shorthand because you do end up doing it so often. We'll do the same for password. We'll say bind to variable password. And actually, I just remember we should probably change this to email from text. It's really nice to get the types in because it means that when you're doing autocomplete, etc., the browser kind of helps you out there, right? Right. And then we'll change this button text to login. Right. Yes. So now we've built a form. Let's actually add our API. And to do that, I'm going to go back to my Supabase project. And then I'm going to grab in settings and API. There, I've got some nice data I need here, right? So the first thing is I need my project URL. So I'm going to copy that here. And then I'm going to go and store that in a variable here called, I'll call it API URL. Right? And the second thing I need from Supabase is my anon public key. So this is an API key that's not secret, but just identifies your project. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to add that in here, API key. Right. So now I've got those two in variables, means I can use them inside my API. So I'm going to go and create a new API. This is going to be a post request. So I know this because I have been scouting Supabase API documentation. This is unfortunately not particularly well documented on their side. So I'll take you through how to do login here. But so yeah, but all I got that from sort of reading through Supabase and figuring out how their API works, right? So we're going to choose API URL, and then we're going to add, oh, there we go. Then we're going to add a path, which is auth v1 and token. Let's just give this a proper name, login. There we go. Then it needs a query parameter called grant type password word. Yes, as to why this is sort of part of Supabase API. That's how they've designed it. So we just kind of have to follow their lead on this one. One more thing when we're calling Supabase, we need to add an API key header to our requests, which here is the one we stored an API key, right? Good. And since I changed this to a post request, we're not auto-fetching by default. So in order to actually make this request, you have to use an action, which is exactly what we want, because we want to do that when we submit the login form, right? The final thing we need to do is we need to go down to our body here and then create a new object. And so objects in Toddle automatically translate to JSON when you make the request, assuming the request is a JSON request. So we can say email here, and email and password. Password to password. So that's basically creating an object in Toddle with email and password. Right now they're both empty because they're both empty here. But as we type into them, I can just actually show that might be easier. So if I say Andreas at toddle.dev, password, right? Now if we go back to our login here, we can see that now actually our data says email and password, right? Because we updated those variables as we were typing. Right. So that should work. The next step is then actually calling it. So we haven't really shown anything. There's nothing like on success. We're not doing anything after we've done it. We won't actually be able to see anything right when we submit the form. But the first step here is then actually make sure when we submit this form, we want to call that API, right? And here we can take our button first and change it to submit. And that means when we click the button, we'll submit the form. This only works inside forms, obviously. And then here we're going to add an event, and that's going to be our form submit event. And there we're going to say call login. And so you'll notice that unlike almost any other event, all the other events, on forms, we actually put in this prevent default first. And what that action does is it prevents the default browser behavior. So by default, when you submit a form, it actually reloads the whole page, because in the old days, normally when you were using forms, you were actually going to a whole new page, like changing the URL. That pretty much is never what we want anymore. So by now, our default behavior is to prevent default, because we wanted just to make an async request in the background, then come back with the data. But that's just, it's good to remember, and we put it in as default that whenever you're using submit on a form, you always want to run the prevent default. So we're going to call login, and again, we're not going to hook anything on to up to success or fail. We're just going to give it a try and kind of see what happens, right? So I've already put my details in, so all I need to do is press login. And now this comes up and say, hey, do you want to save? And we don't really want to, in this case, because I can remember my password of password, right? Now, if we go back and look at our login API, we can see we've got a response back. And that is all the data we got from Supabase when you do a login, right? So we got an access token, which is the one we need. It also says when it expires. We got our user information here, and a bunch of other information that Supabase has on the user we created, right? And so the next step here is that once we're logged in, we need to save this access token in a session cookie in Toddle. And that way we can use that every time we're making a request to Supabase. We can sort of say, hey, use this authentication cookie. And the way we do that is we go into onSuccess here and create a workflow for what happens when this is successful, right? Obviously, if it failed, it's a different story. So on success, what we want to do is set session cookies, and then the access token we want to set here is our login API data and then access token, right? Now, depending on what service you're logging into before you're setting the access token, you might want to specify when it expires. And we actually have that here at 3600. And we absolutely could use that. But in this case, the access token from Supabase is what's called a JSON web token, and it actually contains information about its own expiry inside. Toddle is able to pass that and automatically set the expiry to be whenever that token. So if you're using JSON web tokens, you don't need to deal with expiry. Toddle can sort of figure that out itself. And then once we've set that, so that is whenever we have the success and error, that means that this is a request that takes a little while. And then when it's done doing that, we want to go back to our home page. So we're going to, again, on success, and then we say, go to URL. And that URL is just going to be /. So that's the path to our home page, right? So we've got here, we're going to make the request. If it's successful, then we're going to set the token that we got back and store that so we authenticated our session. And then after that, we're going to go to URL, right? So go back to the home page. And done. So obviously, you should probably add stuff that happens if none of this works out. So if you're not successfully authenticated, it should also tell you, right? You should probably show an error message, whatever comes back from the server. But to save a little bit of time, we're not going to deal too much with all those sort of what we call happy path flows. So happy path is everything is working as it should. You should also add what happens if it doesn't, right? So here I am going to go and try. I'm going to go and try this out for real. So I'm going to go to my preview page of login, and then I'm going to say Andreas at toddle.dev and password, and then I'm going to hit enter. And we can see it takes half a second, and then it redirects us to the homepage, right? And obviously, we can't tell the difference from this homepage that we authenticated because it renders the same every time. So now let's go and build the actual to-do list now that we are logged in. Now, before I continue, it's important to understand that in order to make authentication work inside Toddle, and by that I especially mean authentication with your third-party app or your application, right? So in order for that application running inside Toddle to also be authenticated and use the same session, you need to install the Toddle plugin either for Chrome or Firefox. So whenever we're working with authenticated apps, you need to have the browser plugin installed. And I'll link that in the description how to do that for Chrome and Firefox. So let's go back to our homepage here. So the first thing, I always like working with data first. So I'm going to start by adding the API. And then once we've get the data out, we'll start adding that to the page, right? So we're going to create the first thing actually we're going to do is we're going to again create our API URL variable here and grab that here. And we're going to create our API keys because we need that again for this bit, right? Oops. Key. And that was over here. So we need that for all requests to make to Supabase. We're going to go and add a new API. We're going to call it tasks. And this is going to be a GET request, and this is going to be auto fetch, right? So to make that, first I need my API URL. And then if we go to Supabase, that actually does help you out quite a bit here with your API docs. So you can go into API docs on your Supabase instance, and you can see tables and views here, and we can pick tasks. And this is sort of if you're using the JavaScript library, but if you click over to the bash one on the top here, you get a little bit more info about how should we call this API, right? And in this case, we're just going to get, here we're going to say, this is our base URL we already got. Then we're adding the path rest v1 and tasks. And then it has this select :ID. We don't actually want that. We want to select everything. So this parameter here says what data do you actually want back for your task. Then it also says that you need an API key, which we already have, and then an authorization header that uses this bearer pattern. This is quite common for authentication, that you put in a header for your request that contains a key. These keys are not actually the same key. This is your anonymous key that you always pass along. This one is the actual access token we got back from the login quest. But the important bit here is the rest v1 tasks, right? That's how we get access to our tasks. So I'm going to go back here. And then here I'm going to add a path, which is rest. I'm going to say v1. And then tasks. This immediately calls it because we set it to auto fetch, and it says there's no API key, right? So we have to remember to set the API key. API key. And let's set that to our API key here. So now it doesn't complain anymore, but we don't get much back in terms of data. And that's because right now we're making the quest as if we're unauthenticated. And we only have one record in our task table, and that one's owned by the logged in user. But we haven't actually explained to Supabase through this API that we are logged in. So we are storing Toddle is storing our token, but we have to pass it on to Supabase. And normally you could set an authorization header here in headers, but with the Toddle auth system, the way we actually use that cookie we set is we go into authorization, and then we can say bearer access token. And what that does is saying take the token that you stored as a session cookie in Toddle and pass that on as a bearer token. And that's because this bearer pattern, this idea of using the authorization header, bearer, and then your token is like the most common way to actually do any sort of API authentication. So what Toddle actually does here is it sort of sets that header for you, and sort of makes sure that your token is secure, right? And the second we did that, we can see now actually we're getting data back. And this is because the way Supabase works with the permissions we set, where we set owner equals our UID, that is saying you should only be able to read this record if you are the owner, right? And it understands that we're the owner because we send the authorization token. So if we turn it off, the task doesn't fail because it's getting all the records that you're allowed to see, but it's just there's none that you're allowed to see. And once we add our authentication back in, we're actually getting back the record that we have here, right? And we can see it's got our columns, it's got an ID, it's got created at timestamp, it's got a description and an owner, which is our user ID in Supabase, and completed, which is set to false, right? Right. So our next step is to build our actual list of tasks. So I'm going to cut out this paragraph here and the title, I think, and then we'll add in a list here. And again, we're going back to our light mode. So we're just going to fix the styling here. Background, we're going to set that to 100. I think we'll actually just quickly add a little div wrapping this whole thing, because we're going to need more items, and I'd sort of rather style one container than having to style the same thing many times. Yeah, so we got this one in. We'll add a box shadow. Yeah, something like that. 4, 8, and then 40. Now the actual values for your box shadow depends on how big. This is basically saying, how much should it be offset on the horizontal axis, how much should be offset on the vertical, and then how big of a blur radius should it have, right? And you can play around with these numbers to figure out what you think looks nice. Good. I'm also just going to set the width on this to, let's say, 400 pixels. Is that a bit much? No, I actually quite like that. And then this case, we'll actually set a max width, which is 90%. So what that basically says is you should be 400 pixels, but you should never be bigger than 90% of the screen, right? Then I'm going to cut off these two second list items, because I only need one, and I want that to repeat for every task we have, right? So I'm going to go and I'm going to say repeat. I right click on it, choose repeat. And then in here, I want to pick my tasks and then data, right? And that currently only has one items in it. So I'm not going to see any difference here because it's exactly one, right? And inside this, I'm going to change the text here to be my repeat items description, right? And then I'm just going to sort out some color here. So I don't think I want a background color on this at all, but I do want a font color that's a bit, yeah, that's pretty good. I don't think I want any rounded corners on it either. And then the last thing is, no, actually, that's good. So here I have my list items. The next bit I want to add is I want to add a button on it that sort of says if you're that basically shows if it's complete or not. So we're going to add a button. I'm going to move it up to the top. And then we're going to actually fix the sizing on this. So we're just going to delete both of these size elements to start with, and then change this to be, the list item here, we'll change that to be a horizontal layout, right? And we'll give it a gap of 8 pixels. That's because that's the same padding as it has, right? Yeah. What padding does it have? Yeah, okay. So I don't want this to say button. I want it to have an icon in it. So I'm going to go and grab one for my favorite icon site, table icons. And let's search for check. So we've got a few options here. We've got just a check mark, a checkbox here, a square, and then a circle check. And I kind of like the circle check. So I'm going to grab that one. I'm going to paste it inside my button and clear out the text, right? Okay, pretty good. So this SVG right now is black. That's not really what I want. So there's actually a little trick you can do with SVGs. So if you go into attributes, you can see all the different attributes they have. And SVGs are different than HTML elements. So it's not the same kind of styling you can add. You'll see the same in toddle, but most of it won't actually really apply to SVGs. So you have to treat them a little bit different. In this case, so we can't just go and set like SVG color, at least at the moment in toddle. But what we can do is we can choose, instead of black here with the stroke color, we can choose current color. And what that does is it essentially tells the SVG to take the current text color of the parent element. So now inside my button, I can then go and I can now use the color to change the colors of the SVG. Right. The next thing I want to do is I don't think I want this background at all. So I'm going to take that out. But then, of course, maybe I should change the color to something a little bit smarter. There we are. Well, I think we said 600 for the other one. So maybe, no. There we go. Right. So now I've got, that looks pretty nice. Our hover effect here is not so great. So we're going to go and change that as well to be maybe just like 200. How does that look? I think that's pretty good. But then we should give it some padding, right? Maybe 4 pixel padding. Yeah. And then just now that we started changing the size of the button, maybe 4 pixels is a bit much, actually. Let's give it 2. Yeah. And then I want to add we can just zoom in a bit here. Let's just zoom in so we can see here that that looks pretty good, but the rounded sort of border here and the round icon and the square button doesn't really work for me. So I'm going to go and choose that and then set its border radius to, no. It doesn't really matter. Once you get above like the actual size of the button, it just means round, right? It doesn't get more round than round. So instead of trying to sort of calculate exactly how big the button is and put the right radius, if you just want a round, just throw a value on it, right? That way, if I change the size of the button later, it's still going to be round. I like that. I think that works. Right. So the only issue here is, of course, that this button is indeed not completed, and it looks very completed, right? So we shouldn't actually show this icon because it's not completed. So I'm going to go and grab that icon here in the SVG, and then I'm going to set a show hide formula on it. And inside the show hide formula, I'm going to use the current item. So the current repeat item is the current task we are viewing. And then I'm going to say completed. And this basically says, and this is false, what it basically says is that you should only show this icon if this item is completed. Right? So of course now it's hidden, which is what it should be, but we should put something in place. We're going to go and grab just a circle here. Right. Find a good so many circles. Yeah. Oh, there's one. That one works for me. Let's go and grab that, add that. We'll just paste that in here as well. And we're going to do exactly the same trick here of saying current color. Right. And then this this is now shown, which is correct, but of course we want that to be hidden if it is completed. So it's basically just swapping out these two icons, right? So I'm going to say item and then completed and then add not to it, which basically turns it around, right? So if this is true, it'll be false. If it's false, it'll be true, right? No. That's because I put a repeat on instead of a show hide. That doesn't make any sense. Let's clear that out. Whoops, move myself over there. Yeah, so we'll just take that out and then do a show hide instead. Item and then completed, then not. Perfect. Now I'm just going to zoom out a bit. So that got a bit intense. So now we've got our item and we got a SVG button on it here. The next bit would probably be to actually make sure you can click this and complete it, right? So there's sort of two steps we need to do to make that happen. First, we're going to have to create an event listener on the button and click it. Then we actually have to going to call an API and tell Supabase that it should now update this element to be completed. So let's do the second one first, because it makes more sense to actually have an API we can call for when we click the button. So we're going to go and create a new API, which is update task. It's going to be a post request. And again, we can use our API, our Supabase sort of API documentation over here. And we go down, update rows, right? And what does this say here? It says you should do actually, it says a patch request. It doesn't say, oh, well, you can also upsert. So that actually works as well. So an upsert is like an insert update, both. And what it basically says is that you insert a row. If it already exists, it's gonna update it. But we're actually gonna use this patch here, right? So this is gonna be not a post request, but a patch request. And we're gonna call rest v1 task again. And then in here, it says like some column equals some value. And this is sort of the way Supabase lets you select specific rows. I'll show you how that works in a second. But the important thing is here, we still have the API key authorization. It says the content should be application JSON. That's also good. This bit we don't care too much about. And down here, it says the data should be some columns and some values, right? Basically, it means we can add some data in here and it'll update that data for our specific item. Right. If this doesn't make a ton of sense to you, this whole curl syntax, that's perfectly understandable. It can take a little while to get used to, right? And since we don't really use that specifically in Toddle, it doesn't really matter so much. But it's sort of a way we can read. The important bit here is like, okay, the path we need to add this sort of selector at the end. And we need to add just the columns, just an object with the columns we want to update, right? So I'm going back to Toddle. I'm going to do a patch request, and I'm going to make that to my API URL, right? We're adding our REST v1 and tasks again. And we're adding our API key just like we did before, right? There we go. We want to be authenticated, right? We need the authorization header. And then our body here should be whatever it is we want to update, right? To the new value, right? So in order to do this, we sort of need a variable to hold the data we want to update, if that makes sense. So we're going to go and create a new variable so we can start. So when we click the button, we're going to update a variable, and then we're going to call the API request to update that data. So I'll show you what I mean. So let's go create a new variable, and then we'll call it update item, update task. And like by default, we're going to set that to null. We don't want anything in it, right? Done. And then when we click our button, let's just go and add that click handler. When we click it, what we're going to do is we're going to update that variable, our task, and we're going to set it to our repeat item. So what we're basically saying is, this is what I want to update, right? And in this case, we're happy sort of setting all those things. It doesn't really matter. You can update all. If you're updating to the same value, nothing really changes, right? So that's fine. But we also want to actually change the completed, right? So the completed should not be the same as the value before. So we can add here and say set completed. And then, so what this does is says, create me a new object that looks just like this one, but set the completed property to, in this case, item, which is not what we want, right? So we wanted to set it to be the item. Let me just go full screen here. Item completed and then not. So what this set formula does here, it says it takes this item here and then set the completed to be this value down here. And what we get out is an item that looks just like the original one, but completed is true. This doesn't actually change the repeat item, right? No data in toddle has actually changed yet. This is just the value we're going to set our variable to, right? So I'm going to say done. And then if we try that, let's go into test mode and click this button. Like, we're not seeing any change because we haven't made that whole API request and everything. All we've done is set a variable, and we haven't told toddle to use that variable anywhere, right? But if we go and look at that variable now, update task, we can see it now holds a lot of values, including this completed true, right? So now we have like a whole bunch of stuff here. And we can use that into our update task API. So I'm going to go and take the body, and then I'm going to pick my update task, and that's what I'm going to be setting, right? Now, I didn't really technically need to send all the other data, but there's not really any reason to remove it. It's actually perfectly fine just to have it like this, right? Done. And then when I'm done doing this, right? When I've updated task, I want to see the changes. So I should actually refetch the data from the server. So I'm just going to say unsuccess. Let's go and call tasks, right? So what that does is that I'm going to do the update with this new record. And then when I'm successful, go and refetch all the tasks so I can see the changes. Now, the last bit we're missing here on this is that on Supabase, it says on the update row, this sort of some column, some value that they've put in here as a placeholder. What we need to do here is we need to identify the exact row that we want to update. And we do that with a query param. That's what the question mark in Supabase mean. And what we do here is ID, because that's the item that we want to match on. And then the value here gets a little bit funky. And this is sort of Supabase's API language, you could say, that they have. So we want to concatenate EQ dot. Again, that's part of how it basically says is equal, right? So, and then add here, we'll have our update task ID. So you can see it ends up writing EQ1 because the ID of the one we're updating is 1, right? And it actually fools read out as task where like the parameters ID equals EQ1. What that means in the Supabase sort of API language is where ID is equal to 1, right? So update this task where the ID is equal to 1. And it's really important to have it because you don't want to try and update all tasks to have completed, like to look like this, right? You just want the one where the ID is equal 1. Let's try that. Finally, we just need to make sure that on our button here, we're actually calling that API. So we're going to add another step after we update task, which is call update task. And then we should be done. So let's give that a shot. We're going to go into test mode, click the button, and nothing happens. Let's go and check update task. Content type not acceptable, text plain. That's fair. We'll just add this content type application JSON. So the API needs to know what kind of data we're getting it, right? And by default, text plain if you haven't put anything else in. So we're setting the content type header here. Done. Let's give that another shot. And now we can see when we click it, it actually becomes true, right? It's completed. And the reason why it's complete is because it made the request to the server saying, hey, update this row. And then when it was done, we said, hey, on success, go and refetch all the tasks. So it actually made the second request to refetch them right after, right? So, yeah. So now we can update and we can do that again. Let's give that another shot. If I click it again, it gets unchecked, right? Right. So far, so good. We can view our task. We can complete our task. The last thing I want to add here is that you can add tasks to this. So in here, in our div, just above the list, I'm going to add in a form. And we will just move it up to the top. I literally only need one item in this, so we'll just get rid of all the other stuff. Right? And I am going to change my input style, 100%. Our background, actually, I think we probably still want something like, do we still want that? I think this is okay. We don't want any border radius. I think we want a border, individual borders. We want a bottom border that's solid and 1 pixel and slightly darker. Yeah, that's pretty good. And our focus, that's also good. Just put in the and text color. Let's set that to something like here. Okay. And then we'll put in a placeholder of what do you want to do? Yeah. Maybe make this a bit darker. What is happening here? That's because I'm adding my focus styles. That doesn't make any sense. We don't want focus background color, and we don't want a focus text color. Yeah, there we go. Back to default. Okay, so that explains it a bit. We'll set that there maybe, and then the background color. Yeah, I am very happy with that. I think I want this to be a little bit bigger. So we're going to do 48, I think. Yeah, big old text input. Liking it? Good. Now, in this case, we should, just like we did on the input page, or the login page, sorry, we want to bind this input to a variable so that when we submit it, we have the data to send off, right? So I'm going to go and add a new, I'm going to call it new item description. I'm going to set it to nothing to begin with. Our input on attributes, just like on the login page, we'll go and bind that to a variable, right? So now we say update toddle documentation, right? Whenever I'm typing in this field, I'm actually updating the value of this variable, right? So the last thing we need to do is when we submit this form, which will happen when you press enter inside and input inside it, we want to go and create a new item, refetch our data, just like we did with the edit, so it shows up here in our list, right? So we're going to go and create a new API, and it's going to be create task. That is going to be a post request, if I remember correctly. Let's just check. This is insert row. That is what we want. Says post request. Yes, we are doing REST v1 task again. API key, all that good stuff. Content type, yes, we don't need the prefer return minimal. And then we just put in the data we actually want to insert, right? And because in our table, if we have a look at tasks, right, especially if we go to the edit table, like what we actually have is that completed defaults to false. So if we don't provide it with the completed value, it'll be false. Timestamp defaults to now, and we always want that. We want to set the timestamp, right? Description, it doesn't have a default, and the owner doesn't actually have a default, but we should just set that. We can actually use the same thing we did in the. We can use the same logic here we did in the row level security. So basically says, well, if you don't set your user ID, it's just going to be the ID of the user making the request, right? And I'm going to set that to not nullable because we do need that. And then we're going to save. Boom, 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 boom. There we go, right? But the point here was that if we go and check again, is the only field that doesn't have sensible defaults here is the description. So that's all we actually need to send when creating a new one. Supabase can figure out how to fill in the rest correctly without our help, right? Just saving some more here. So we create our task. We're going to again go and grab the API URL. And the content type is already set by default on a post. We'll add path, rest, v1, and tasks. We're adding our API key to be API key. And that is actually pretty much it. We need authentication, of course, because we are the one making the request, not some random unnamed person. And then we need to set the body. And what we learned from Supabase there was like, it's still an object, right? We're always doing objects. But the only field we need to set here is description, right? That's what we just learned from Supabase. That everything else I can figure out itself. And we already store that in our new item description, right? So when we call this API, it's gonna take whatever is in that new item description and then submit that to Supabase and create that new record. And then when we come back, we want to do the same thing as update. When we're successful, let's go and refetch our tasks, right? Yes. Now let's go and make sure that actually happens when you submit the form, right? So I'm going to go to my form. I'm going to add a submit event. This is again, just like with the login. And instead of adding going directly to call API, I want to add what's called a switch here. So a switch lets you decide to go down one of two paths, or actually multiple paths. You can add many more here, right? We only need two for this bit, right? And basically saying, if some condition is true, do these bits, otherwise do this bit over here. The condition I want to add in here is that if our new item description is not equal to an empty string, right? And I can name this formula. So occasionally you will see this name pop up, and it's really mostly for now here inside this. This is very useful. If description is set, right? And what you can see happens here is that now we have this block that says, hey, if description is set, which is defined by this formula right here, then go and do this action. Otherwise, don't do this action, right? And in this case, we're not going to add any sort of error state, but it's basically a way of preventing us from creating tasks that don't have a description. So we're sort of safeguarding with this switch statement. So we're going to call create task, And again, we already set the unsuccess in the API. You can also do it here if you prefer for some reason. Maybe what you need to do depends a little bit on how you came into calling an API. But in our case, we set it in the API panel, so we don't need to touch any of this. So let's go and give that a try. I've already got my input filled, so I'm actually happy with that. I am just going to hit enter. And we can see it creates a new record in Supabase and then refetches all the data right after. So that works. The one thing that doesn't quite work yet is that this input is still filled. We should probably clear that out once we submit. So we can do that by going into our form and our submit request here. And then we can say, well, on success, let's just set that new item description to an empty string, right? So when we've made the call on success, go and reset that input, right? So let's go and try that now. Now, it doesn't do it because we just made the request, right? And we just changed it after. Create more content on toddle. And now we can see as we create a new one, we added there, we can still select what have we done on these. Well, we created more content. Interesting little bit here is that it currently changes its order depending on what's clicked, because toddle doesn't really like, we're getting them back in different order in Supabase, depending on what we're doing. So that looks a little bit weird. We can just fix that quickly by saying, when I'm iterating through this list, I want you, and we can do it from attributes, go to repeat. I want you to sort this item. So I'm going to say sort by, and then we're going to say created at, right? And that's ascending. So we'll start with the lowest one, right? So if we do this, then right now, if we're going back into test mode, they're always going to keep the right order, right? Because we sorted them. So obviously there's a ton more things we could add to our to-do app, support for deleting items, maybe even sharing your task with other users. But this was just meant to get you started. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you'll try this out yourself and build your own version of this in Toddle. And if so, please come and share it in our Discord channel, which is also a really good place to get help and assistance if you get stuck. So remember to like and subscribe this video, and I'll see you in the next one.